My name is Ted Middleton. I'm the Chief Product Officer for Verizon Digital Media Services. Verizon Digital Media Services is kind of a new division within Verizon. About a year ago, one of my colleagues was up here, either at the CDN Summit or at Streaming Media East, talking about what we were going to do. And so this year I get to stand up and talk about some of the things we have done and some of the things we're going to continue to do. Verizon Digital Media Services was brought together basically Verizon, as many service providers have attempted to do in getting into the CDN space. They've tried it a few different times in a few different ways. They've tried putting together commodity and commercial offerings from other vendors, appliance-based solutions. They didn't have a great deal of success with that because what they found is what many people have found is without control over the platform, without deep technical experience and expertise, without the ability to control the stack, actually own the code that goes into the platform, you hit roadblocks, you hit dead ends, you hit the inability to scale, you hit the inability to react effectively to customer requests in different application environments. And so what they did is they tried something different. They went out and actually acquired two different organizations, the first of which was a little company called Uplink. Now, Uplink's pedigree goes back to the days of Move networks, and so they're really the pioneers that kind of brought about the whole HTTP segmented multi-bit rate adaptive streaming format. So that small team based in Salt Lake City is now part of Verizon Digital Media Services. And the second thing they did is they acquired a CDN. They realized that in addition to wanting to really deal with the transformation of the video workflow and video taking over, the predominant traffic profile of the internet, they needed a delivery infrastructure that would scale as well. And so they bought Edgecast Networks. And so Edgecast Networks was a leading CDN provider. So the combination of those two entities, plus some capabilities and technology that Verizon had as part of its original digital media services team, are what comprise Verizon Digital Media Services today. So one of our primary goals, as I said, is really around changing the video workflow. And so there's kind of three major components of that from our perspective. One is we're trying to simplify the workflow, make it very easy to acquire content, acquire media, whether it's live, working with broadcasters to deal with linear channel programming, or create VOD libraries, right? So making it very easy to work with the content workflow to get content into the system, to remove the complexities of all the different formats and things like that, different bit rate generation, et cetera, and to where you're dealing with a broadcaster who has substantial infrastructure in place and they're already dealing with a workflow that's fairly rigid and has been established for years and years and has potentially millions or tens of millions of dollars of infrastructure behind it, integrate with that workflow and with that infrastructure. The second is improve the quality of experience. So we're really interested in making a broadcast-like, TV viewing-like experience over the internet, and that's really kind of where everyone's trying to go. And that deals with things like, again, the formats, multi-bit rate, supporting different devices, doing things like server-side ad insertion, things like that we'll talk about in a minute. And then enabling changing consumer demand. So there's a pretty massive evolution happening in the industry today. Obviously video moving to mobile, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit, but this year and in coming years, there's a massive transformation in front of us in terms of enabling new business models around video. So enabling consumers we all talk about getting any content anywhere on any device, but I think we're going to see the emergence of new ways in which consumers can subscribe to content, unbundle content from some of the traditional ways that they've licensed and subscribed to it currently. Okay. So kind of comparing and contrasting the way we work versus the traditional approach. The traditional approach, obviously, you have to buy a fair bit of encoding infrastructure. Out of that encoding infrastructure, you're generating potentially lots of different formats to deal with the different end user devices that you expect to serve. That results in lots of storage, You might have to apply lots of different, several different DRM schemes to account for the variances on different platform environments and ecosystems. You likely have a content management system in there that's going to try to manage all this and manage metadata. And then you've got to somehow support the different devices and bring together things like analytics. With our solution, it starts with a single workflow. We have a component we call the slicer, which I'll get into in a minute, which really is at the front end of that process, and it does a bunch of magic to try to simplify things all the way through the life cycle. And what that does is it results in less storage, less generation of lots of different formats, a more consistent kind of protection regimen, a single CMS, and by what the slicer does in getting things into a single format based on HLS, and working with some device SDKs and things like that, is we can deliver that content to any of the devices that are out there using that single format. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. So we're in New York, we're home of the pizza by the slice, so it's appropriate to talk about video by the slice. The slicer component, it's a software-based component, it's very lightweight. We've run it on anything from servers that are deployed in a broadcast environment to a Mac Mini to a Surface tablet in the case of what we call a camera slicer. What it does is it basically pre-processes the video, does a lightweight encode, divides the video up into what we call slices that are then broadcast up into the cloud where further transformation occurs. Okay? The nice thing about that is it supports a couple of different workflows. We have what's called a camera slicer, where we can acquire video right off of a camera or right off your laptop or something like that, or a live capture card. And so if you're doing an event, you've got kind of a backpack-based thing, you're at a venue, you can capture video right off of a camera. It supports things like watch folders and batch ingest if you're doing VOD. It supports broadcast live and linear feeds if it's running on a server connected to an HDSDI feed, et cetera. So kind of one piece of software captures a whole bunch of different use cases and turns them into a single kind of similar workflow. The other nice thing is that piece of software can capture various signaling and things like that happen typically in a broadcast environment. So things like content breaks, ad pods, blackout management, things like that. All that signaling, whether it's via SCUDdy triggers, various APIs that can inject ad markers, et cetera, all those things can be carried along with that video stream right from the source. And so the cloud, the transcoding process, the content management process, the ad insertion process are all aware natively of the things that are occurring within that broadcast workflow. It also creates frame-accurate boundaries. So the nice thing about that is that when you go to an ad break or you have maybe you're at a sports event or a live event or something like that, and you're responding to things, maybe there's a rain delay or something like that, the events that happen within the video are managed to a frame-accurate level. So then on playback, things like ads getting inserted, et cetera, are very seamless. And we'll talk a little bit about things like server-side ad insertion. But that also includes doing some magic around things like even creating variable length segments, right? So you don't want to have a little slice of video that ends up resulting in whether it's a black screen or having to revert to slate or something like that. The slicer can detect all those things, and it's actually at source time generating the appropriate slices, chunks, segments, et cetera, to make sure that that playback experience is as optimized as possible. Let's see. And the last two things are that because we're dealing with slices as they're generated, that allows for a really scalable, horizontally scalable, and kind of parallelized workflow in the cloud. So we can take each individual slice, we can do the transcoding that's generating all the adaptive bitrate profiles, and we can do that actually while the content's being ingested. So if you're using that slicer for a VOD workflow, you can actually begin playout of a VOD asset while the remainder of it is still being ingested. So you don't have to wait for minutes or hours for a full-length feature to be ingested and processed. You can do things like enable VOD assets to occur as the live stream is actually still being ingested. Okay. So in terms of the program management and CMS side, what you can do here is, again, the system will automatically detect things like program boundaries. It will create assets out of live and linear broadcast feeds as the channel is processing. So the nice thing about that is assets are being created automatically, again, frame accurate, in the cloud. You can now create things like virtual channels. You can create personalized channels. You can create VOD assets from a broadcast feed. And you can mix and match all those things together. So if you want to create a highly personalized experience, you can do that down to maybe it's an individual user, or it's a group of users, or a subscriber package, or something like that. And you can really easily combine live feeds, alternative live feeds for certain regions or licensing restriction boundaries, VOD content. So you can really mix and match dynamically and control all that programmatically through APIs, which is pretty cool. And again, because all of the metadata is retained, you can do ad breaks, blackout management, entitlement and subscription integration, whether it's your own kind of licensing server or use capabilities that we have. Again, kind of in terms of improving the quality of experience, one of the things we do is server-side ad insertion. And so rather than having the client make all of the ad calls, individual sessions are tracked and personalized ads are inserted into the video based on individual user sessions from the server side. And so what that does is it enables a really seamless experience. Again, that TV-like, broadcast-like experience. So we'll actually retrieve ads in advance. We can pre-process them, transcode them so that they have the same aspect ratio. They're served in the same bit rate. Again, they start and stop on frame-accurate boundaries. So the transition from the content to an ad pod back to content literally is like you're watching the television. You don't deal with letterboxing, buffering, or start delays while the client goes out and retrieves ads. The system can automatically expand and contract around ad pods because you might get variable ad loads come back from the ad server. So the system can keep track of that. It actually knows whether or not, if you were short on ads by 15 seconds in this ad pod, it can request an extra 15 seconds worth of ads in the next ad pod. So it keeps your kind of linear experience roughly the same for a variety of users, even though they might be getting different ad experiences. Okay. And lastly, again, with the proliferation of devices and different formats, et cetera, we have a unified HLS-based format. We have SDKs that enable devices that don't either natively support HLS or support HLS in a spec-compliant manner. We have 140 different devices and profiles that are supported today. And again, because we've got this unified workflow, you can create assets and lineups and channels and things like that from existing events, and even tailor those based on device types, device profiles, et cetera. So where have we been using this? We've actually done a number of different events, and we have both kind of live events that we've done, linear channels that we're supporting 24/7 today, VOD libraries. So anything from the Oscars, Saturday Night Live 40th anniversary. We power the Fios mobile application and a few different partner workflows associated with that, like the NFL mobile app, IndyCar racing series. We support the the various Watch ABC applications. Did World Cup, et cetera, all on this platform. So as I mentioned, CDN, and we're at the CDN Summit, so CDN is an important component of that workflow and all the magic that happens to try to make the video lifecycle really easy, seamless, and a TV-like experience doesn't happen well unless you have CDN infrastructure to go along with it. And so one of the big parts of our portfolio, obviously, is around the CDN. We think we have a very complete and broad CDN offering that goes anywhere from the content preparation and acquisition, distribution, monetization, securing content and origin infrastructure, site acceleration and dynamic content acceleration, edge-deployed app logic via rules and intelligent modules, all the way down to traffic management and DNS services. So the last couple of sessions talked about scalability and availability. We have all the right components to basically scale both your video, web presence, application services, et cetera, make sure that your site stays available and reliable. In terms of what our footprint looks like, we have a global footprint. We're serving approaching 6 trillion objects a month with a capacity of about 10 terabits per second of egress capacity, tens of thousands of servers around the globe. This year, we're going to be making some regional expansions in China, India, and a major expansion in South America. So that'll just do nothing but improve the performance. And what that leads to is what we believe is market-leading performance. So we're constantly monitoring ourselves to the tune of tens of billions of monitoring tests a month. Our data shows that we compete very favorably, if not leading, in performance. Third-party data shows it. We actually partnered with our friends here at Microsoft. It's interesting, last night I pulled up the Sodexis report. They mentioned Sodexis. The three of us at the table here are the top fastest CDNs as of last night anyway. And even more importantly, our customer data shows it. So this is an example of one of our media and entertainment segment customers. They did a 3-way comparison between 3 of the leading CDNs. I believe this was ourselves, Akamai, and Fastly. And so what they've done is kind of done a thematic map shading the regions where one of the CDNs was the best performer in those regions. For us, this was exciting because the things in blue or light blue are Verizon, the things in orange are Akamai, and the things in red are Fastly. So you can see, like, in this customer's experience using their own data and their own instrumentation, we pretty much dominated the performance profile. So we're doing this with lots of other customers as well. Here's a little sampling of those, some of which are customers that have been using us for years. Others are customers that we've acquired since putting together these components and bringing these new services to market. And a little bit about kind of what's coming. So a couple of big focus areas for us are around security. We continue to make investments in new services around web application firewall and DDoS protection, obviously with increasing attacks and denial of service profiles. We need those services to protect ourselves as well as offer services that help protect customers. Increasingly, customers look to their CDN service provider as a primary means of providing that kind of first tier in a layered protection regimen. Big data and analytics. So we've got some efforts underway to produce some really interesting and kind of deeper analytics, particularly around video quality. So I think one of the earlier sessions was talking about player beaconing and getting data out of player instrumentation. So we've got some emerging capabilities in that area that I think are going to be interesting. And that'll help us make sure that we can report to and optimize for customers the performance characteristics of our network, as well as provide some intelligence to them about better ways to monetize content, who's consuming what content. And I think, interestingly, as business models emerge, and we talk at the bottom point around things like new subscription models, skinny bundles, micro-segmentation, a la carte channel subscriptions, things like that. I think the interesting trend there is going to be that while the consumer has more choice and more flexibility in what they watch and when they watch it and how they pay for it. I think it'll be interesting because we'll see some disruption in some of the traditional aggregators that are kind of the established incumbents today. We'll likely see some fragmentation of that. And so things like content discovery, content recommendation, how you find the content you want to watch out of many, many sources as opposed to a few sources, I think will also become an interesting area where big data and analytics becomes applicable. And lastly, since we are, Verizon and wireless and consumer services are a big part of what we do, things around mobile optimization. So LTE Multicast, we've got some features in kind of the coming generation of devices that will actually enable in the chipset, radio, stack, the ability to do multicast over wireless. So when you think about things like those examples like IndyCar, NASCAR, NFL, et cetera, where you can light up a venue and actually do a multicast streamed experience to whether it's a localized collection of audience members, maybe at that particular event, or people that aren't able to be at the event, but you want kind of a regional or national reach, but doing it efficiently and not creating lots of RAN and wireless congestion. So things like that. Being able to optimize around LTE as an ingest mechanism. I talked about a backpack-based kind of studio, or the ability to get transmissions from a venue up into the cloud with high quality. So things like LTE ingest, and then RAN, or radio area network aware optimization on the CDN side, so embedding CDN and associated technologies more deeply into the wireless network. So those are all areas that we're certainly looking at and we think will represent exciting developments in the years to come. And I'll close out by saying that we live in exciting times, and I think it's this next year or so is going to be very interesting in terms of how the business models around video start to evolve. So with that, I'll wrap, and if there's any questions, be happy to take them.
Could you share when LTE Multicast might be deployed?
So we're actually using it in certain pilot examples. One or two of those that were on that slide are actually using that today. But again, it's largely going to be predicated around when the various devices incorporate the hardware to support that. And so not being the product manager of that portion, I don't know exact timelines, but it's on its way. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.